Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. Coming up, we're going to talk about what to consider when choosing a use year on your Disney Vacation Club contract on this week's episode of the DVC Show. The DVC Show is brought to you by the DVC Store. For more than 25 years, the DVC Store has been helping people save money on Disney Vacation Club. Check out all the current resale listings at dvcstore.com or give them a call at 1-800-550-6493. And by the DVC forums on disboards.com. Check out some of the great information on every aspect of Disney Vacation Club over on disboards.com and join in the conversation. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the show, coming to you from the Bob Varley Studio in Orlando, Florida. I'm your host, Pete Werner, joined at the table this week by my good friends, Miss Jackie Gailey.
Hi.
From the DVC Store, Miss Jamie Carr.
Hi, everybody.
Our producer for these episodes, Mr. Corey Fiasconaro.
Hey, guys.
And joining us via Skype, Mr. Pete Shidley.
Hey.
Hey. And so welcome, folks. Hope your week is off to a good start, even though it's Monday. But hope it's off to a good start so far. A couple things in-house. I'm just used to saying that on Tuesdays. But, you know, I got to remember this is going up on Monday. Anyway, just a couple things in housekeeping. As I've mentioned the last few shows, started a new blog, which has been an interesting experience for me. I've been having a lot of fun with it, dvcfan.com. And we've also started a Facebook group called DVC Fan. And you can go, it's the Facebook group is a closed group. So when you ask to join, there are 3 questions that are asked of you to just answer. Helps us know that you're not a bot. Helps us know that you have a pulse. The number of people that don't answer the questions would blow your mind. So please answer the questions. And we've got almost, as of the morning we're recording this, about 4,800 people now have joined that group over the last few weeks. So I'm really happy.
Nice.
Happy about that. A lot of great stuff going on. So please come over and check that out. And also just another plug for our DVC forums on disboards.com. In my opinion, the best source of information you're going to find anywhere on DVC. Just some amazing, amazing stuff. But this episode is talking about use years. We get a lot of questions about, you know, what use year should I pick and why is use year important? And the fact of the matter is, I don't know the answer to those questions. I know what not to do because it's what I did. I was warned to pay attention to it. And I think I was just so anxious to get in that I really didn't pay attention. So the first contract I bought was the 75 points direct from Disney at Copper Creek. And at that point, they were able to backdate my contract so I could get 2018's points, but they could only go back as far as September. This was in February. And I had already put in an offer that had been accepted on Boulder Ridge that had a March use year. And Jerry said to me, get a March use year. But I wanted those 2018 points. So I'm like, I just do September. So now I've got September at Copper Creek and then my March use year at Boulder Ridge. And then I put in on, I think it was Beach Club was the next one I put in on. And that was a February use year. And so was my Bay Lake Tower one, I think was a February use year. So I have 3 use years. And once all the points got loaded into my account, I understood why people say you really should just have 1 use year. Because now I have multiple contracts that I have to finagle. And all of my points are not available to me the way they would be if it was all in 1 use year. So for that reason, for managing purposes, it's easier if you have 1 use year. But I know that there are considerations in terms of when, for me, the 11-month window, and I don't travel at the same time every year or anything like that. So those considerations aren't important to me, but I know that there is consideration about that for other people. And maybe, Jamie, you could tell us a little bit more about how that works.
Sure. So if you're not a member, I'll touch on both, but if you're not a member, use year would be important to you if you travel the exact same time every year. So, for instance, you're a school teacher, you're vacationing in June, you vacationed in June the last few times, then it's not that there's one use year that's going to be best, but there's 3 or 4 that are going to be ideal. So to kind of put the misnomers to bed about why you buy a particular use year, there's one reason, and really one reason only if you're not a member, and that's if you have to cancel a reservation and you want to make sure you have time to bank the points. So using the June example, if you had a June use year, then you make your reservation 11 months in advance, 7 months in advance, whichever you do. You now, if something's come up, you have to cancel. Well, your points were just allocated on the first of the month. So you have plenty of time to use them, plenty of time to bank them, no concerns. If you had, per se, an August use year, so you got your points August 2019, you're going June of 2020, now something's come up, you have to cancel. It's too late to bank your points. You only have June and July to use your points. You're kind of up against a wall time-wise. So to give yourself the best opportunity, even if you think you'll never cancel, you won't have to cancel, if you're going into it new and you have a particular time of year you travel, the best thing you can do is buy a use year starting the month that you travel and then going backwards 3 or 4 months. So for a June, there's no May, so it would be June, April, March, or February. You don't want to go forward from when you vacation because then you're in that situation where it's much too late to bank the points. That's really the only reason. If you've heard anything else, 11-month window, 7-month window, not the case.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Use year is the month your points renew, the first of every month of that particular month, and there's a banking date. It has nothing to do with making reservations. So if you're going to buy a specific use year, it's because you travel the exact same time every year. That's the easy answer.
Wow.
And you're saying there's no May use year.
No May.
So, and what other months? There are other months too that you
Correct. Yeah, May, November, January, and July.
And any idea why?
Never knew that.
So the reason that I've understood is Disney wanted an inventorying procedure, a control procedure over members getting points. So they couldn't have every member get their points on the same day for the influx. If you think back to 91, there was no internet. So everybody was calling to book. They couldn't have everybody calling at the same time, banking at the same time. So they did an inventorying procedure to stagger. Also, it's an inventory control. When you bank your points, they're going to know the villas aren't being used by this member during this time, so it allows more control over the whole inventory procedure. I believe it was, and don't 100% me on this, but I believe it was because they wanted a break in between points renewing and banking, again, going back to some type of an inventory and control.
Okay.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, I knew that there were certain months you couldn't, that you couldn't have as use years. I just didn't necessarily understand why. Now, you had been saying something to me before the show about if you've bought direct from if you've bought direct from Disney. Explain this to me.
Okay.
That Disney won't sell you another use year.
If you're already a member. So if you're buying direct from Disney and you're not a member, you'll have the option, like Pete did, to pick a use year because you're not a member. And your resale contract wasn't closed at the time that you bought that, so they didn't see you as a member yet. If you're already a member, so you're an existing DVC member, and you go to Disney, and you say, I want to add on, Disney will only sell you your use year. So if, for instance, same example, you have a June use year, you go to Disney, you say, I want to buy some points at Copper Creek, I want to buy some points at Riviera. They're only going to sell you a June use year.
But it doesn't matter if you're already a member and you buy resale.
Does not matter with
obviously.
resale. You have complete control of resale. You can buy any use year you want. You can keep it the same. You can buy a different. And that's where it becomes very important with resale for us to explain to existing members the importance of, if you do keep the same use year, why it would be an advantage. And it may not be an advantage. I've had members that their original buy from Disney, they got a use year, and then using the example I gave, they got an August use year, they go in June, and they've struggled with that use year their entire membership. So now they say, I want to buy a different use year.
Right.
I want more control. then there are people that a different use year, even with resale, is going to make perfect sense. But for most people, it's going to be keeping the same.
And there's no changing your use year, right? You
No,
can't go to Disney
it's
and
deeded.
say,
No, there's no changing it.
wow.
So Jamie, question on what you were just saying. If you're like Pete and you have 3 different use years and you buy another direct contract, will they let you choose any of the 3 use years?
That's a great question. It is my understanding that yes, you would then choose which membership you wanted it to go under.
Okay.
Okay, because I did buy an additional 75 points direct at Copper Creek. Well, because we have to mention that Mr. Fiasconaro back there just became a member a few weeks ago.
Yeah, just joined about 2 weeks ago. Just had my first official DVC stay last weekend. Did a review on that. That should be coming up in the near future.
Yeah, when I choose to release it. And I went in with him and his wife. While I was there, I just added on another 75 points. And he didn't give me the option of where I wanted them. It just went right on to my existing direct with Copper Creek in September, which I was actually fine with. That's where I wanted.
In that case, you would want it on your same contract, though.
Right.
Correct. Yeah, I think, and that bodes another question to what Pete was asking. So you already had a direct. If somebody had bought resale, and let's say your contracts were all resale, then at that point, I believe they'd have to ask you which one did you want it to merge with, because
Right,
you
yeah.
don't have a direct purchase where yours and it was the same resort, so it wouldn't make sense to put it into another membership.
Okay. Now, Pete, what's your use here?
So I have 2 contracts. I have one with one at Animal Kingdom Lodge. I have December use year, and then my smaller contract at Boardwalk is a February use year. I intentionally got a different use year because of the first contract we got. I was not so concerned. We didn't have a certain time of year we wanted to travel. So if you don't have what Jamie talks about, if you don't have I always travel at the same time of year, it's not as important, right? I mean, those first 8 months of the contract, I mean, I travel in the fall, I travel in the spring. It didn't matter so much. However, the Boardwalk contract we bought specifically for Food and Wine Festival. So I did not want to match that use year. I did not want a December 1st use year, knowing I would be traveling mostly in October and November. February wasn't perfect, but the contract otherwise was very much what I wanted. And so it still will be traveling at the end of 8 months. But I think it's close enough that I was happy with the year, but I didn't want to get a December one.
Okay. What about you, Jackie? What are your use years?
Well, I have September, and we've got 200 points. So September works out. When we bought back in 2011, I had no real idea of the difference that it made. So we typically traveled in the spring, like around May-ish. So it was kind of we just wanted to make sure that we were able to book 11 months in advance. We did not know what we were doing. And now that I heard Jamie explain what really makes the difference, it's interesting to me. I find that really fascinating because the contract that we bought came with the prior year's full 200 points. So when we closed, we had 400 points. And I was really jazzed about that, right? So I was like, I don't care when the use year is. It can be whenever it wants to be. I don't care.
Right.
I just want those points.
Exactly.
I won't tell you how much I paid per point, though.
What did you pay for
In
point?
2011, it was $67 a point.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
I know.
It's
really crazy.
It is. It's crazy where the prices have gone. But then
Yeah.
you have to think about where these prices are going to be, 8 years from now. You're talking about 8 years ago you were paying that. And you
Yeah.
did resale, right?
We did.
And
Yeah.
so where these are going to be 8 years from now.
Yeah.
Well, even look at the direct pricing. I mean, I've watched the market. So I've been with Timeshare Store for 16 years. I've seen the highest of the highs and the lowest of the lows. And that's a whole nother topic of conversation about what really drives the market and when the prices dip and when the prices go up. But just looking at when I started with the Timeshare Store, 16 years ago, the direct price, there was a very minimal difference between buying resale and buying direct. And back then it was 100% benefits. The benefits were the same as buying from Disney. So there wasn't as big of a gap. And so sometimes it was a little bit of a harder sale resale because people would say, well, there's not a huge savings. And now you're talking about 16 years later, there's typically almost a 50% savings, in some cases even more than that with resale. So not only have the resale prices gone up, but direct has gone up, and so you've still got that gap where it's still a fantastic savings when you're putting it next to direct pricing.
Well,
Yeah. See, and when we bought, it was just before it made a difference for
Buying resale.
versus buying direct.
so
But I mean, it was less expensive, but it wasn't. The benefits are all the same.
and
So-
Fiasco, what use year did you end up with?
So this isn't something that I thought about at all when going into buying DVC. Like, use year didn't really matter to me, but I ended up with a December use year, which actually, now that we're talking about it, I'm thinking it kind of worked out well, because how my December use year works is that you bank your points by July 31st, and the trip that I would really want to plan every year would fall in the beginning of July. So it actually worked out well for me that I ended up with December.
Yeah, I still don't think it matters to me.
It as a non-member, it really probably isn't going to matter to 90% of people. I mean, in 16 years, I've had a handful of people that said, yes, I travel this exact same time.
Well, I will say this. Now, when I look at resale contracts, I'm only looking at February, March, September. I don't want to add a fourth one into it at this point.
No, and we could do a whole nother show that if you are going to have multiple use years, you don't really want to go above 2, and this is the trick to why. So Disney will allow you to transfer points from one account to another account one time, in or out, per use year. And that's really use year meaning calendar year. It's a little confusing. You could transfer your 2018 points today. You could transfer your 2019 points tomorrow. So when it's calling it use year, but it's really within a calendar year. So on 2 of your memberships, you could move all the points from one account to another account. They're still going to retain their original home resort. They're still going to retain their banking date. They're not going to show online, so that's
I can only use those by calling into member services.
correct. But what it allows you to do is when you're making a reservation under 7 months, it's allowing you to pool all your points together. And what I tell people is if you do that, call DVC, make the first reservation, use all the transfer points or as much of them as you can, and now it's off your mind for the next year. So if you have 2, it's much more manageable by doing a transfer of points, getting everything in one lump sum, and then making your reservations. If you get above 2, if you get to 4, then you've actually can combine 4 into 2. But I'd say don't go above. If you're gonna go above any one, you need to stay with 2.
Yeah, that I wish I had just.
Well, we'll
either-
get you a 4th use year, and then you can
There
manage
we
them
go.
as 2.
Oh my goodness! See that all of that just makes my head spin because
Yeah.
I'm thinking, oh man, that sounds like work, and I
It
don't,
Oh,
is.
It is work.
And it's just it. Go ahead, Pete.
I think the key to choosing use years is to think about it as combining points, right? So in my view, if you want more than one contract at the same resort, you really want to have the same use year, because you're going to often want to combine those points for a single reservation. When it comes to 2 different resorts, maybe not so much. Again, in my case, I bought those boardwalk points for one purpose and one purpose only. That's for boardwalk. I'm never going to take those points and put them in with my Animal Kingdom points. So if I have different use years, it doesn't matter so much. If you plan on combining them a lot at different resorts, you might want to get the same use year, because then you can combine them easily at 7 months without doing the transfer that Jamie just talked about. But I think, as I said, to me, different resorts, it doesn't matter as much. Then it's really just about keeping them all organized. The more use years you have, the more differences you have in your account, right? You have different contracts.
Right. Yeah. No. It's just like I'm juggling.
And I agree with Pete completely. So basically what I tell people is if you're buying a second home resort to use over 7 months, it really doesn't matter. So a lot of people do exactly what Pete did. They buy a beach club, they buy a small boardwalk, they're using them for food and wine. Those are the people that it really doesn't matter. You're treating that as a singular contract. You're banking and borrowing within that contract to make your reservation. It's manageable. When you purchase a resale, we're going to set it up so Disney knows you're a member. They should merge it under your online DVC member dashboard, so you're going to still see everything on one login, which is most people's concern. But if you're treating it as a totally separate membership, then don't worry about it, because you're treating it as a totally separate membership, and Pete really summed it up best. If you're combining the points, that's when you need to be concerned. And combining the points meaning over 7 or under 7. If you're combining them for anything, it's much better to keep one use year.
Okay.
Yeah, and obviously 2 different resorts, you can't combine them until the 7-month mark.
Correct.
So
Right.
So the fact that they're not the same use year, it doesn't matter if you're just using them at the home resort. It only matters once you hit that 7-month mark and you want to combine them together. And in that case, you can use the transfer as well. So there's that option.
Well, that's a question that comes up a lot too. Is if can I use, if I transfer from one contract into another, can I use all those points at? So let's say you have a beach club and you have a Bay Lake Tower, and you take your Bay Lake Tower points and transfer them into Beach Club. Oh, can I now use all those points at the 11-month mark? No, you can't.
You cannot, and that's
you can
probably one of
only
the
use-
biggest questions we get.
You can only use your Beach Club points 11 months out. You can only use your Bay Lake Tower points 11 months out. Even if you combine them, it still retains, as you said, that home resort priority. So,
But one of the tricks that I just mentioned, I don't know if people caught it. I said within a contract, banking and borrowing. So what I would say seasoned members or people that have had a membership long enough to know how they're using it, what they do is buy a small contract, like Pete said, maybe buy 50 points at Boardwalk. You're allowed to bank and borrow within that contract. So technically every 3 years, you can have 150 points at the 11-month window by banking and borrowing. So a lot of members that own 2 home resorts, they don't necessarily buy all the points they need for a yearly vacation. They do an every other year vacation. So 1 year you use your Boardwalk, 1 year you use your Bay Lake, and you bank, and then, or you possibly borrow, and then you alternate years. And that's what, so you've got the ability to have up to 300% or 3 times your points at any given time within a contract without using another resort. So
Yeah.
there's options.
it's complicated though. I mean, it really is a complicated process. I understand why some people kind of get put off.
And that's the biggest thing is if you buy all your contracts in the same use year, if that works for you, then it's all in the same place. So you can always, combine it at 7 months. You don't have to worry about these points expire at this date and these points expire at that date. So it can work for you. If you don't combine them into one contract, or if you don't combine them into one use year, it's just a little more complicated. It's a little more work for someone to pay attention to when their points expire and things
Right.
like that. So I would kind of agree. I have 2 use years. I don't have any problem keeping it straight. 3 is probably okay. I don't think I would ever go more than 3.
Yeah,
because
I
you're
wish I
gonna-
didn't have 3.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, that's an awful lot on use years.
I know. I'm trying to figure out, why would you combine your at 7 months? Why would you want to?
Because if you want all, let's say I want to get a cabin at Copper Creek, and I need a lot of points, more than that's in any one contract. If I can combine 2 of them, so I can just make one reservation
Right.
rather than making a few days on one contract and then reserving another few days on another contract. It just makes
Right.
it a little bit
And
easier.
that brings up I'll just touch on it real quick. When you do that, so let's say you treat them as 2 separate and you book so many nights, as Jackie said, you book so many nights under one, so many nights under the other. You link the reservations with Disney. There are times that you are not only going to have to go to the front desk to check out and check back in, you may actually have to check out.
and move rooms.
Correct. And that's what people think, that linking reservations solve that problem, but it does not. They're viewed as 2 separate reservations. There's no guarantee you're going to be in the same villa. So we get into a whole nother animal there with that, but we'll leave it at that.
We'll leave it at that. All right.
They're pretty good about that, though. I will say, because we have done that before a couple times where we ended up, most recently, we ended up renting points at Wilderness Lodge from a friend, and then I ended up adding a night with my own points, and we just made sure to go to the front desk right at the start and told them, hey, I got 2 reservations, please make sure these are the same room. And usually in my case, they've always accommodated me when that's happened. However, I would recommend going to the front desk and talking about it.
Making
Don't just
sure.
apply that it's going to happen.
Right.
Because it might not happen.
All right. Well, that's an awful lot there. And I think that is going to do it for this episode of our show, folks. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you again next week. Have a great one.